Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 1. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. The moon hung heavy and oppressive over Lisbon that evening, casting long, sinister shadows across the marble facade of the Da. Loserstight. Inside, a tense silence permeated the grand dining hall, broken only by the faint clink of silverware and the muffled whispers of servants lurking in the background. Isabel sat rigid at the head of the table, her trembling hands clasped tightly. Before her, eyes darting nervously toward her father, Count Rodrigo, whose face was a mask of stern resolve. The flickering candlelight accentuated the sharp lines of his jaw, his piercing gaze fixed on his rebellious daughter. "Isabel," he snapped, voice cold as ice. "Your refusal to conform is a stain upon our family's honor. Tell me, what madness drives you to consort with a common coachman? Do you comprehend the shame you bring upon us?" Isabel's cheeks flushed with a mixture of defiance and fear. She refused to cower beneath his scrutinizing stare. "Father, I love Miguel," she whispered softly, voice trembling but unwavering. "I cannot change my heart, no matter how much you condemn it." The room seemed to tighten around her words, every chandelier's crystal glittering like daggers poised to strike. At that moment, a nervous servant entered hurriedly, clutching a silver goblet filled with crimson wine. Without a word, Isabel's mother, Lady Mariana, looked away, her face pale and trembling, caught between the loyalty to her husband and the silent cry for mercy. Isabel's eyes flicked to her mother, seeking comfort, but found only the haunting quiet of unspoken despair. Her fingers clenched into fists as her father gestured sharply, eyes flashing with fury. "Enough of this." "Nonsense!" he barked, voice rising. "If you refuse the marriage I have arranged." Suddenly, with a swift, practiced motion, Isabel reached into her bodice, her trembling fingers brushing against a small vial hidden beneath her dress. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she silently pleaded with herself. This was her only chance. She slipped the vial into her palm, feeling its cold, familiar weight. Her mind raced. If she could only create chaos, momentarily disorient her family, then she and Miguel could slip away amid the tumult. As her father's voice continued to thunder on about duty and shame, Isabel's eyes flicked toward the goblet of wine, her resolve hardening. "Father," she said softly, voice trembling with suppressed emotion, "I will not be your puppet. I choose my own path." With trembling hands, she lifted the goblet, the liquid shimmering like blood in the candlelight. Her father's eyes widened in surprise as she raised it, and in that instant, her nerves broke. She tipped the goblet to her lips, the deadly concoction sliding down her throat as a rush of panic and hope surged within her. The poison took effect swiftly. Her vision blurred. Her body grew heavy, yet her heart beat fiercely with the desperate hope of freedom. Behind her, the distant sound of screams echoed as her family's servants realized what had happened, chaos erupting in the once stoic estate. Isabel's head nodded slightly, her consciousness flickering between worlds, as she saw Miguel rushing toward her, eyes wide with fear and love. "We're leaving tonight," she managed to whisper, voice barely audible. "No matter what." As her father bellowed orders and the servants scrambled, she knew her act had ignited a scandal that would shake Lisbon's very foundations, an act of rebellion born from love, defiance, and the desperate hope to forge a life beyond the chains of aristocratic tyranny. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, Seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 3. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Under the cloak of night, the estate lay shrouded in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant murmur of the river and the faint rustling of the ancient trees swaying in the cold wind. Isabel's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she slipped through the darkened corridors, her breath catching each time she crossed a shadowed corner. Every step she took was heavy with foreboding. She knew her reckless plan teetered on the edge of disaster, yet her resolve burned brighter than ever. In her trembling hands, she clutched a small vial of poison, a bitter potion she had secretly acquired, cunningly hidden within a worn silk handkerchief. Her father's opulent study was the first target. Its polished mahogany gleamed under the flickering candlelight, casting long, sinister shadows on the walls. She entered quietly, her senses heightened, ears straining for any sign of awakening. Inside, her father sat rigid in his armchair, engrossed in a letter, unaware of her presence. Quietly, she approached, voice trembling but steady, as she uncorked the vial and poured the dark liquid into his goblet. Her fingers trembled as she watched the liquid swirl, the weight of her deed pressing down on her conscience. "Forgive me," she whispered softly, trembling as her hand withdrew. Just then, a faint noise, an almost imperceptible creak, made her freeze. Her father's eyes flicked up, narrowing with suspicion. "Isabel," he rasped, voice tense and cold. Her heart felt like shattering glass as she stepped back into the shadows, desperately trying to mask her panic. "Yes, father," she replied, voice strained, her mind racing. She knew she had to act swiftly now, to hide her trail. As her father reached for the goblet, a shadow fell across his face, the first sign of the poison's deadly work. His features, contorted in confusion, then pain, as he clutched his chest. The room erupted into chaos. Servants rushed in, crying out in alarm. But she had already slipped away, slipping through a side door and into the night. Outside, Miguel waited in the shadows, eyes filled with anxious love. She hurried to him, voice hushed but urgent. "Now's the time. We must go, before they realize what's happened." As they hurried into the darkness, the estate's windows flickered with the glow of lanterns, and her father's screams echoed faintly behind them, a haunting reminder of her desperate act. Every breath she took felt like a step closer to liberation, and a step deeper into the abyss she had willingly plunged herself into. Her mind spun with the knowledge that this night's darkness had forever changed her life, sealing her fate in a web of scandal, guilt, and the unyielding hope of a brighter dawn beyond the walls of her gilded cage. The chilling stillness of the night stretched like a heavy shroud across the sprawling estate as Isabel and Miguel propelled their battered coach into the shadows of Lisbon's outskirts. The chaos of the poisoning lingered in her mind, her father's agonized gasp, his contorted face twisting in disbelief and pain. That haunting tableau forever etched in her memory. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the weight of her desperate choice. The narrow cobbled streets flickered faintly with dying lantern light, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for her as she clutched the reins, tighter. Beside her, Miguel's hands trembled, eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirrors, fearing pursuit or discovery at every turn. "Are we really doing this?" he asked, voice strained with a mixture of dread and hope. She squeezed his hand, her own trembling but resolute. "There's no turning back now," she whispered fiercely, the words slicing through the silence like a blade. The wind howled like a mournful spirit, whipping through the coach's cracked windows, tugging at her hair, stinging her cheeks with icy tears she refused to shed. Every mile away from her gilded prison felt like freedom, the promise of a life unshackled from lies and duty, but also like walking into an abyss of uncertainty. As they sped past crumbling stone walls and through deserted alleyways, Isabel's mind raced with memories. Her childhood laughter, her mother's gentle touch, now overshadowed by the specter of betrayal and guilt. Her internal struggle swelled anew. Was this act of rebellion truly her salvation, or had she crossed a line that could never be undone? She cast a quick glance at Miguel, whose face was taut with anxiety, yet flickering with devotion. "We must keep going," she urged, voice trembling but firm. "No matter what happens, we'll find a way. I've made my choice. This is our chance to live, really live, away from their suffocating shadows." The coach lurched over uneven cobbles, the wheels clattering like the relentless pounding of her conscience. Shadows danced ominously on the roadside, the distant toll of bells whispering warnings of the chaos she'd unleashed. Her mind replayed her father's last gasping breath, his eyes wide with shock, her mother's cry muffled by the walls she once thought impenetrable. She knew the storm she'd set in motion would follow her forever, her name branding her as a monster or a martyr depending on who judged her. But in her heart, she clung to the fragile hope that love, true and unbound, was worth the sacrificial fire. Yet beneath her fearless facade, a gnawing dread persisted. Had she truly escaped, or merely stepped into a darker trap of her own making? Her breath caught painfully as she looked ahead into the night, knowing this was only the beginning of their flight and that, no matter the distance, the scandal of that night would linger like a ghost, haunting every turn of her soul. The dim light of dawn seeped through the narrow, cracked windows of the makeshift courtroom, casting long, trembling shadows across the weathered stone walls as Isabel sat rigid, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, damp cloth, and the faint, bitter tang of worry that clung to her skin like a shroud. Every eye in the room was fixed upon her. Judges, jurors, curious townsfolk, and members of the aristocratic elite who had traveled from Lisbon's shadowed alleys, each seeking answers and justice in their own rigid way. Isabel's gaze flickered to Miguel, who stood nearby with a haunted expression, his jaw clenched and shoulders tense, like a man who had already borne too much. She knew her words would carry the weight of her fate. Her voice, though trembling, cut through the suffocating silence as she finally rose, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I loved him," she declared, her voice ringing with raw honesty that seemed to echo in the vaulted chamber. "Yes, I poisoned my family, but not out of malice or greed. I did it because I could no longer bear the suffocation of lies, the endless chains of societal expectation. I saw only two choices: submit and be crushed, or fight with every ounce of my soul." Her eyes, shimmering with a volatile mix of defiance and despair, searched the faces around her. "I do not ask for your forgiveness. I only ask that you understand that sometimes love demands the most impossible sacrifices." As she spoke, her trembling hands subtly released a small, hidden vial from her sleeve, her fingers trembling, but resolute. Her words were a plea for acknowledgement of her internal truth, a desperate cry that challenged the unyielding morality of her world. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant, echoing footsteps of guards approaching to escort her away. Isabel's mind raced, visions of her father's cold, accusatory gaze, her mother's muffled scream, and Miguel's unwavering stare, all intertwined in a tapestry of guilt and hope. As the guards reached for her, she took one last breath, her resolve hardening. She refused to be merely a victim of her circumstances. She was a woman who had chosen her destiny, no matter how dark, and her final act was a defiant declaration that love, no matter how forbidden, could ignite a spark that no prison could extinguish. And in that moment, she understood that her story would ripple beyond these walls, fueling whispers of rebellion and the quiet possibility of change. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original, Party 7. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. In the suffocating darkness of her secluded chamber, Isabel sat trembling, her hands clenched into trembling fists as the echoes of her last, desperate act reverberated through her mind. The flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows across her pale face, betraying the storm of emotions roiling within: fear, guilt, defiance, and an unyielding resolve. Outside, the distant clatter of footsteps signaled the arrival of the guards, slowly drawing nearer, their voices muffled but growing louder with every passing moment. She knew this moment was her culmination, the point of no return. And yet, beneath the rising tide of dread, a flicker of fiery hope burned bright. She remembered her father's cold, unyielding stare during her confession, the way his jaw clenched as he processed her words, and her mother's muffled scream that haunted her dreams. The memory of Miguel's unwavering gaze, the quiet strength that had sustained her through the storm, flooded her consciousness. She pressed her trembling hand against her chest, feeling her rapid heartbeat pounding like a war drum, each beat a testament to her defiance. Her mind raced through their clandestine plans, the whispered promises beneath the shadows of the garden wall, the stolen moments where love had blossomed amidst the crushing confines of her aristocratic cage. Now, as the door creaked open and the guards burst into her chamber, she stood abruptly, her resolve crystallizing amid the chaos. "I am ready," she whispered softly, voice steady despite her trembling lips. She straightened her back, her gown draped around her like a shroud of rebellion. As they seized her, she locked eyes with Miguel's distant figure outside the window, a silent vow passing between them, before she was dragged away, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. Every step she took was a defiant stride toward her destiny, a conscious choice to shatter the chains of societal tyranny and ignite a spark of rebellion that would ripple beyond these walls. Her final act was no longer just fleeing. It was a declaration that love, even in the face of death and disgrace, could forge a new path, one carved by courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable spirit. And as her figure disappeared into the shadows, a whisper of her rebellion lingered, promising that her story was only beginning, destined to inspire whispers of change long after the dust settled. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 9. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 10. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Beneath the waning light of dusk, the grand estate of the Vasconcelos loomed ominously, its looming facade casting long, distorted shadows over the marble courtyard where chaos now reigned. Isabel, her face pale but fiercely determined, clutched the cold porcelain cup that held the remnants of her treacherous deed. Poisoned wine, a silent agent of destruction. Her heart pounded with a tumult of guilt and defiance as she watched. Her father, Count Rodrigo, clutch his chest, stumbling backwards into the ornate tapestry hung hastily over the wall, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "You dare defy us, girl?" He spat with venom, voice trembling with rage and betrayal. Isabel's breath hitched, her trembling hands tightening around the cup. "It was the only way," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rising storm outside, her eyes shining with tears that refused to fall. Her father's face contorted, a mixture of pain and bewilderment, as he sank to his knees, clutching his chest, his grandiose armor shattered by his own daughter's rebellion. Behind her, the flickering chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor, illuminating the chaos unfolding in flashes and shadows. Servants shouted, some collapsing into stunned silence. The room was a battlefield of emotion and shattered tradition. Isabel's voice broke through the tumult, firm yet trembling with the weight of her decision. "I love Miguel. I would rather die than be shackled by your chains. I am not yours to command anymore." As her words echoed, Miguel burst into the hall, his face etched with both relief and dread. He reached for her, eyes pleading. "Isabel, we have to go, now, before they seize us." Her pulse hammered like a drum in her ears, but she nodded resolutely. "Yes. Tonight we escape. This cage. I'm done living in shadows." With a swift movement, she propelled herself forward, clutching her skirts, and together they slipped past the fallen form of her father, fleeing through the ornate double doors into the tempestuous night awaiting beyond. The storm unleashed its fury as they dashed into the darkness, the echoes of her family's scandal, a poison that would ripple through the society of Lisbon, fading into the howling wind. Isabel's lungs burned with every step, but her mind was clear. This act of rebellion, born of love and desperation, would mark the beginning of her true life, one forged in defiance, in sacrifice, and in the unbreakable resolve to reclaim her destiny from the suffocating grip of her heritage. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 12. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 13. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. In the cold silence of that moonless night, Isabel's breath caught in her throat as she carefully lifted the ornate crystal decanter from her father's sideboard, the faint flicker of candlelight casting long, trembling shadows across her delicate fingers. Her heart pounded with a tumult of fear and defiance, each beat echoing the pounding of her own resolve. With trembling hands, she unscrewed the tiny vial hidden within her sleeve, an unnoticed relic from her clandestine visits to the garden, where she had secretly brewed a bitter, deadly concoction under the watchful eyes of moonlit roses. Her eyes darted around the vast, opulent chamber, gilded furniture, heavy velvet drapes, the scent of expensive cigars lingering in the air. Each detail a reminder of the suffocating world she desperately sought to escape. Quietly, she tipped the poison into her father's glass, the liquid shimmering unnaturally as it mingled with the rich red wine. Her stomach clenched, a swirl of guilt and adrenaline twisting within her. Please forgive me," she whispered softly, clutching the glass tight before stepping back into the shadows. As her father raised his goblet, unaware of his impending doom, Isabel's eyes flicked to the door, where Miguel, her love, waited anxiously, his face a mask of worry and hope. With a silent nod, she signaled that the moment had come, and he hurried to open the carriage door. Moments later, the grand estate erupted into chaos, servants rushing in, coughing, crying out. The family's proud facade shattered by the sudden, tragic turn. Isabel watched from a hidden alcove, her throat tight, tears threatening to spill. Her mind flashed with memories of her childhood, innocent days filled with laughter beneath the sprawling fig trees, and her dreams of a life beyond this gilded cage. She knew this act of rebellion would forever alter her destiny, yet her heart swelled with a strange sense of liberation. As the coach lurched into the darkness, leaving behind the wreckage of her family's reputation, Isabel whispered fiercely, "To Miguel, this is only the beginning. We will create our own world, no matter what they say." The night swallowed them whole, but inside her, a spark of defiance blazed brighter than ever. Her journey toward freedom had just begun, forged in blood, love, and unyielding courage. As the first rays of dawn seeped through the stained glass windows of the grand estate, a tense stillness lingered like a heavy fog hanging over the marble corridors. Isabel, cloaked in a dark shawl, moved swiftly through the silent hallways, her heart pounding with a chaotic mix of adrenaline and dread. Every step echoed softly against the cold stone, each footfall a reminder of the irreversible path she had chosen. She clutched the small vial of poison tightly in her trembling hand, feeling the icy glass press against her palm, as if daring her to reconsider. Her mind raced through the events of the night, the hurried preparations, the whispered promises of freedom with Miguel, the bitter taste of her decision settling deep within her stomach. She remembered her father's stern voice during the dinner. "Honor is all we have," he had said, eyes cold and unyielding, words that now felt like chains, tightening around her soul. The image of her mother's face, betrayed by a forced smile, haunted her as she tiptoed past her chamber, where the ornate portrait of her ancestors watched silently, judging her. In the dim light, she saw the flickering shadows of servants, moving about, unaware of her silent departure, their footsteps muffled by the plush rug. Reaching the grand dining room, her eyes flickered over her sleeping family. Her father, tall and imposing, still in his formal nightclothes. Her mother, delicate and fragile, clutching a lace handkerchief. Her younger brother, innocent in his dreams. Heart aching, Isabel hesitated only a moment before slipping the vial into her father's goblet, carefully disguising it beneath a fold of fabric. Her breath caught as she heard a faint creak behind her. She spun around to see her trusted maid, eyes wide with curiosity. For a fleeting second, panic threatened to overtake her, but she quickly masked it with a forced calm. "Go back to bed," she whispered sharply, voice trembling just enough to sound assertive. The maid nodded and hurried away, unaware of the storm brewing in that very room. As she moved toward the door, Isabel's fingers brushed her locket, a symbol of her childhood innocence. Before she stepped into the corridor, her nerves razor-sharp with resolve. Outside, the night awaited, cloaking her in shadows as she hurried toward the carriage that waited in the moonlit courtyard. With a final glance at the ancestral portraits lining the hall, she whispered softly, "Tonight, I reclaim my life," knowing full well that once the poison took effect, everything she knew, her family, her reputation, her very identity, would be forever altered. The cool night air kissed her skin as she slipped into the carriage, clutching Miguel's hand tightly, her eyes shining with a fierce defiance that refused to be extinguished. As the wheels began to roll away from the crumbling fortress of her past, Isabel felt a surge of liberation coursing through her veins, igniting a fragile hope that, No matter how dark the road ahead, she would forge her own destiny from the ashes of this blood-soaked night. Under the dim glow of a flickering candle, Isabel sat alone in the small, cold chamber of her exile, her fingers trembling as she clutched the delicate glass vial hidden beneath her bodice. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, a relentless storm of fear and defiance swirling within her chest. Outside, the distant hum of the night carried whispers of her family's downfall, rumors spreading like wildfire through the narrow streets of Lisbon, the scandal that had erupted from her desperate act intertwining with the shadows of her own guilt. She had thought her escape would bring liberation, a breath of fresh air beyond the suffocating gilded cage, but now every second felt weighted with the blood of her actions. Her mind replayed the silent, trembling moments before she poured the poison into her father's wine, a mixture she had meticulously prepared, knowing it would leave no trace, yet haunted by the morality of her deed. She remembered Miguel's eyes, full of hope and fear, pleading silently as she handed him the vial, whispering, "We must do this. It's the only way." Her heart clenched at the memory, a bitter taste rising in her throat. The adrenaline had dulled her senses, but now, in the stillness, the full horror of her choice settled like a stone in her stomach. The faint aroma of the poison lingered in the air, the scent of betrayal, of broken chains, of a love so raw and reckless it bordered on madness. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared into the dark corners of the room, whispering softly, "Was it worth it? Did I truly save us, or condemn us all to ruin?" Her voice cracked, trembling with the weight of her internal war. Just then, a soft knock echoed from the door, and Miguel's voice called through the wood. "Are you all right? We must leave soon, Isabel. The dawn will bring questions, and we cannot stay any longer." She took a shaky breath, her resolve hardening once more. With clenched fists and a heart pounding like thunder, she replied, "Yes, I am ready. Whatever comes, I will face it. For love, for freedom. This night marks the end of her reign." As she quietly rose, clutching her cloak around her trembling frame, a flicker of grim hope flashed in her eyes. Stepping into the corridor, she was acutely aware that her actions had sealed her fate, her innocence forever lost in the shadows of her rebellion. But she refused to let despair consume her. Instead, she moved forward, determined to carve her destiny from the ashes of her past, even if it meant walking through hell itself. The dawn crept through the narrow cracks of the old estate's shutters, casting a pallid grayish hue over the grand hall where chaos still reigned. The heavy scent of spilled wine mingled with the metallic tang of blood, clung to the air like a dark cloud of remorse. Isabel, trembling but resolute, stood amidst the aftermath of her desperate act, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders as her pulse hammered in her ears. Her eyes, wide and haunted, flicked toward the door where Miguel waited in the shadows, his face pale but determined. "We did what we had to," she whispered, voice barely audible over the muffled din of servants whispering in fear, and her father's distant, furious voice echoing through the corridors. She moved swiftly, her steps tentative yet purposeful, toward the servant stairs where Miguel's figure appeared from the gloom, his hands trembling as he reached out to her. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly, voice strained with worry. She nodded, eyes shimmering with unspoken resolve. "There's no turning back now. The scandal will follow us. Every whispered rumor, every judgment cast. But I'd rather face the consequences than live under their tyranny a second longer." Her fingers brushed the worn leather of the coach's reins, already prepared for flight, as she glanced back at the mansion's shadowed facade, its ornate stonework now seeming like a mausoleum of her innocence. "Tonight we leave everything behind," she declared, voice steadier. this is our rebellion, not just against them, but against the suffocating chains of society that tried to define us. We are forging our own destiny. With one last glance at the darkened window that overlooked the garden where her childhood, innocence once danced, she took Miguel's hand, feeling the cold steel of her resolve. As they hurried toward the awaiting carriage, the distant pounding of footsteps grew louder, her father's wrath, inevitable and imminent, threatening to consume her. Yet, amid the racing storm of her mind, she found a flicker of hope, an ember that refused to die, believing that tonight's act, as reckless and dangerous as it was, marked the true beginning of her fight for freedom, even if it meant walking through fire to reach it. The first rays of dawn had barely pierced the heavy velvet curtain of night, when Isabel da Luz sat silently in the shadowed corner of her chamber, the weight of her decision pressing down like an iron shackle around her chest. Her delicate fingers trembled as she clutched the small vial wrapped in a piece of faded silk, the poison she had meticulously prepared in secret, each drop a testament to her desperation and resolve. Outside, the estate stirred with the muted sounds of waking servants and distant horse hooves. But inside her, a storm of conflicting emotions raged: fear, hope, guilt, and a fierce, unyielding desire to break free. Her eyes flicked to the closed door, where her father's heavy footsteps echoed faintly, a reminder of the peril awaiting her. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, yet now, standing on the precipice of irreversible action, every heartbeat hammered louder than the last. "Tonight, I will change everything," she whispered softly, voice trembling yet resolute, as she rose from her chair and moved toward her family's dining hall, where her father, Count Rodrigo de Vasconcelos, sat rigidly at the head of the table, engrossed in unreadable thoughts. The room was silent except for the crackling fire and the distant rustle of silk as servants prepared breakfast. Her gaze narrowed, and with a swift, practiced movement, she slipped the vial into her father's wineglass, barely noticing the faint shimmer of the poisoned surface. Her hand was steady now, her breath shallow but deliberate, the culmination of months of clandestine planning. As she turned to leave, her heart pounding fiercely, she caught Miguel's eyes from the doorway. His face tense with anxiety yet filled with unwavering love. "If this works, we're finally free," she murmured, voice barely audible, a fragile whisper against the looming despair. She hurried out, clutching her cloak tightly around her, her footsteps muffled by the ancient stone corridors as she navigated toward the carriage waiting in the courtyard under the pale morning light. Her mind flashed with images of her childhood innocence, those carefree days in the lush garden, untouched by the weight of societal expectations. And she felt a bitter pang of sorrow mixed with an unrelenting hope. The world outside beckoned, with promises of liberation, but the shadow of her father's wrath, an ominous, looming specter, reminded her that her act of rebellion was also a gamble with her very soul. As she finally reached the carriage, the door swung open, and Miguel reached out a trembling hand. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Isabel nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "Tonight, we leave everything behind," she declared, voice steadier now, tinged with the fire of defiance, as the carriage lurched forward, leaving behind the mansion's shadowed facade, its ornate stonework now appearing as a mausoleum of her innocence. She clung to the hope that her gamble would carve a new path, even if it meant walking through flames of shame and punishment. Her heart throbbed with the knowledge that her actions, driven by love and desperation, would forever alter her fate, and perhaps ultimately challenge the suffocating morals that had imprisoned her for so long. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 19. The story continues, exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested. In the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Narrative development following. Desenvolvimento específico da narrativa, seguindo rigorosamente o prompt original. Parte 20. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested. In the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner.